Welcome to the Learn Psychotherapy podcast, presented by Sentio University, using the emerging science of deliberate practice to make therapists more effective. I'm Ben Feynman, your partner on the path to therapeutic mastery. Welcome to the introduction episode of Season 1. These introduction episodes are where I'll talk with experts about the overall theme of each season, so you'll know exactly why the skills we've chosen are important and also when to use them. For Season 1, we're focusing on the common factors. And joining me to introduce this topic, as well as the method of skill building we'll be using on this podcast called deliberate practice, are Doctors Tony Rumanier and Alex Vosh. Hi, Tony and Alex.
Hi, Ben.
So maybe just to get started, if the two of you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves.
So, hi, I'm Tony Rumanier. I'm a psychologist, and I live in Seattle, and I am with Sentio University. And my research specialty is on developing and implementing new methods of therapist training, in particular, using deliberate practice to improve therapist effectiveness.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. I'm Alex Vosh. I'm a clinical psychologist from Lisbon, Portugal, also part of Sentio University. And for many years, I was involved with the psychotherapy integration movement and doing research on common factors, and eventually also getting very interested in starting to develop methods for training psychotherapists from different therapy models. And so you're going to notice my deep love for this theme, I hope.
Well, let's start with the topic of common factors before shifting to deliberate practice. So Alex, can you explain just in a simple way, what are the common factors of psychotherapy?
Yeah, I guess when a lot of people start career mental health, like they quickly realize that it's kind of a maze because there are so many different therapy models. Like it might take you a little bit to realize, but first you're going to see, there's a workshop on the CBT thing, and then there's the psychodynamic thing, and now there's the emotion-focused thing. And at first it's fun, and after the 20th model you hear, you're like, oh my God, what's going on here? And I remember like an old survey in the 90s by Saul Garfield that was like, at that time, there were like 200 known therapy models. And I know by now it's probably like 2000, So, I mean, it can become very overwhelming, the number of like legitimate therapy models that are out there. But at the same time, what's really cool is that it seems that a lot of people across the decades have suggested that all of these therapy models, at least in part, work through common factors, meaning that there's something common across these different models that if you heard like the person from each model, usually each model kind of highlights the differences across models, but also in reality, there are many commonalities. So there was this smart guy called Sal Rosenzweig in 1936 who published the first paper saying, hey, maybe therapy kind of works always through the same kind of factors, and we can name those if you want, Ben. And over the years, there's been a lot of research that has actually demonstrated that, in a way, therapy models are mostly more alike than different, especially when they work. It doesn't mean that they're totally the same, and there are definitely differences across models, but there are very important common factors that seem to predict therapy outcomes.
And so is it fair to say then that the common factors are important because arguably these are the elements of psychotherapy that lead to the most change with clients, that these trans-theoretical aspects of therapy are in some ways just as important, if not more important, than the models themselves?
I think that's a fair argument. It depends on who you ask, of course, because I also find the dichotomy between talking about common factors and specific factors from models a little bit misleading, because when we start talking about common factors, you're going to notice that common factors and specific techniques from specific models are kind of intertwined in the way. But we know for sure that yes, if you start to study the common factors across models, those seem to really predict a lot of the success of a therapy.
And is it also fair to say that the skills that we're going to be looking at and practicing in this season on the podcast can be integrated into any approach to therapy? So CBT, psychodynamic, whatever popular modality of therapy is out there that people are drawn to, these common factors can be integrated into all of them, some of them. How exactly does that work?
Yeah, I think the most studied common factors that are traditionally empathic kind of factors, alliance, the therapeutic alliance and therapeutic relationship. Fortunately, those factors I don't think are very controversial in that most therapists and therapy models would agree to their importance. Uh, how they may show up in therapy in different models might be different. But yes, I think that everything that we're going to be talking about and all these skills that you're going to be focusing on this season would be helpful for anyone from any therapy model, for sure.
And before we talk about what those specific skills are, I mean, of course, people can see them in the episodes that are listed, but we'll take a moment and talk about what specific common factors we've pulled for this season. Are there any guidelines or is there any advice that you could give in terms of when to use these skills? If somebody's listening and they're working with a client, how would they know when to use certain skills of common factors versus others?
Yeah, the when to do what question is always very tricky, and I am very scared to to promote any kind of idea. Clearly, do this when that. I remember when I was starting, I was a clinician. I almost like I had this kind of invisible band around my wrist saying, "What would Carl Rogers do?" Whenever I panicked with a client, because it just felt that if I went back to very humanistic, empathic, warmth, validation, that usually seemed to be the best kind of safety net for most situations I didn't know what to do. And it's kind of a do no harm kind of thing. So like one answer to your question is the common factors, most of the common factor skill that we're going to be focusing on are definitely on the do no harm category. Like if you don't know what to do, these are probably going to at least not do harm and most likely do some good. And I can say that for all the techniques from different models, because specific techniques sometimes are, quite evocative and sometimes might even lead to some, difficult, tense moments in the relationship. And I think most of the common factors techniques that we're focusing on are fairly safe and usable throughout the therapy process.
Great. And before we get into what those common factors are we'll be practicing this season, I want to note that these are exercises, these are skills that were created and developed by the three of us together. So I've had the privilege to be working with the two of you for a year and a half now. And so as part of some of the projects we're working on at Sentio University and elsewhere, these are exercises that I have created that the two of you have helped me to develop. And the specific common factors that we're targeting in this season are empathy, goal consensus and collaboration, positive regard and affirmation, alliance building, and congruence and genuineness. And Alex, I'd love to hear you just off the top of your head, why are these qualities so important for therapists to practice to get good at with these skills that we've created?
Yeah. Well, first of all, there's a good research base for all of them, which you can't say for a lot of techniques that may be practiced in psychotherapy. Like there's a lot of research, especially behind the empathic, congruence, alliance focus kind of techniques. And there's a lot of research demonstrating that the more and better you do those skills, the more likely it is that you'll have good results with your clients. So that's a cool thing, I think. The other thing is that it touches upon elements of the therapeutic relationship, all of these skills that you just mentioned, like having goal consensus, being collaborative with your clients, being empathic, warm, it all kind of feeds into a positive attachment and collaboration with your clients. And that is certainly a good predictor of therapy outcomes across all therapy modalities.
Great. Thanks, Alex. And since this is the first introduction episode, I'm so happy, Tony, that you're here to talk about deliberate practice so we can discuss exactly how we'll be learning psychotherapy and why this is different. So what is deliberate practice? What are we doing on this podcast?
Great question. So, Ben, the way that I like most to explain deliberate practice is to draw a parallel with music or sports. So, for example, yourself, did you ever learn a sport or a musical instrument growing up?
Not well. I do play the drums, and I've been doing this for 25 years. I don't think I'm any better than I was when I was a teenager.
Okay, great. Now, if you wanted to get better at the drums, let's say you even wanted to be a professional musician, right, and tour around in a band,
Great.
Would you expect to have to practice playing the drums?
Presumably, yes, unless my band was terrible.
Right. I mean, it's kind of a silly question, of course, right? And so deliberate practice is how professionals achieve competence and then expertise and then maintain it across their career. And it's a process of rehearsing key essential skills that they're going to use repeatedly in performance, getting feedback on that rehearsal, and then engaging in a process of iterative improvement over time, where they keep rehearsing and keep getting feedback until they achieve the performance that they want.
And so this is what we're doing on this podcast. We're taking this approach you're describing to me becoming a famous, successful drummer in a band. And each season we're working with a different volunteer and putting that person through a series of skills to help them develop competencies to become better at therapy. Is that fair to describe how we're using deliberate practice here?
Yeah, it is. Therapy, from the outside, therapy can sometimes seem like magic, like, whoa, what's going on? It's like we're wizards or something. But, like every skill, how good you are at it largely depends on how much you've practiced it.
And can you talk about how these ideas are spreading in our field? So obviously in the field of psychotherapy, this is a fairly new field. It's been about the last 10 years, and you and Alex have both been leading the charge with the research you've been doing. But it's not a new idea, broadly speaking. So I'd love to hear you talk about how is deliberate practice growing in the field of psychotherapy, and what are some of the things that you've been involved with to kind of help spread these ideas and legitimize them compared to how they've already been legitimized elsewhere?
Yeah, traditionally psychotherapy has been taught more like a philosophy. Going back to Freud, which is where you read a lot of books about it, you write a lot of papers about it, you talk about it a lot in class. And that's really good for learning the theories of psychotherapy. I know in graduate school, I got really good at writing psychotherapy. I got really good at talking psychotherapy. If you heard me talk about my therapy sessions, you would think I was a really good therapist. But if you watched videos of me actually performing psychotherapy with real clients, it was a totally different thing. And so in other words, my intellectual understanding of therapy kept going up. My academic understanding of therapy kept going up, but my performance ability, so my ability to actually do therapy with my clients, did not go up that quickly. And that was frustrating for me. And that is actually supported by the research. The research shows that graduate training does not reliably help trainees get better outcomes with their clients, which is, of course, the most important goal of graduate training. And so there's been a number of researchers looking into how can we improve the effectiveness of psychotherapy training. And a lot of us are looking at the area of deliberate practice. It's a relatively new area, though there is some very promising preliminary research that shows that every hour spent in deliberate practice is considered like a high leverage training activity. So you can get a lot more benefit from every hour of deliberate practice than you might get in hours spent reading about psychotherapy or writing a paper about psychotherapy or that kind of thing. And it makes sense when you think about other fields. If you're trying to get better at soccer and you spend 10 hours reading about soccer, how much better are you going to be at playing soccer? Right? Rather than 10 hours rehearsing soccer. Now, psychotherapy is different than soccer. It's different than the drums. It is its own unique profession. And so what we're doing is we're trying to figure out how do we best adapt deliberate practice specifically for psychotherapy. And we've developed a whole bunch of methods that involve role plays and responding to actors who are playing clients in videos. And we've put those on our website, and we're integrating them into graduate training at Sentio University.
And so what do you feel like is the most important thing for our audience here to know to get the most out of doing deliberate practice? Maybe even using the season on the common factors as an example. Like, what can people do to get the most out of this podcast?
So this podcast is really cool because it's an opportunity to, there's lots of podcasts where you can learn about therapy, right? And that's great. But this podcast is an opportunity to really try it in simulation, not try it with a real client. So you don't have to worry about, freaking someone out or whatever, right? It's your opportunity to try it in role play or in rehearsal and to see what is it really like to be a therapist. What's it like when your client says something that might catch you off guard, and your task is to stay attuned or to offer empathy or to repair an alliance rupture, or all these challenges that therapists have to perform every day in and day out. And so I think it's actually a very realistic kind of taste of being a therapist.
I want to reframe what you said to satisfy my urge to tell people the best way to get the most out of this podcast is to practice along, to pause the episode after each client statement, to try and improvise a response that sounds good, feels authentic, and meets the skill criteria, and really engage as much as possible. Not while driving, set aside time, be responsible. But Tony, like you're saying, what makes deliberate practice different is the practice, is the ability to try these things in real time to develop those skills so that I can go on tour and become a professional drummer.
Yeah, let's warn people up front. Some of these exercises might make you feel a little uncomfortable. And that's because therapy can get a little uncomfortable. There's going to be some challenging rehearsal here. And that's okay. I want to really underline this, that if someone is sitting there trying this and they feel uncomfortable, that does not in any way mean that they're doing it wrong. And that does not signal that maybe they wouldn't be a good therapist. Quite the contrary. It means they're actually emotionally engaged and they're emotionally feeling vulnerable. And that is one of the hardest challenges of being a therapist, but also one of the most essential, is for us to learn to tolerate feeling uncomfortable, staying vulnerable when we're uncomfortable, and even kind of patient and self-compassionate while we are uncomfortable. And I think your audience will only really get that if they're rehearsing as it goes, if they're engaging in it, if they're willing to be vulnerable as it goes.
That was a perfect testimonial. Thank you. I think the last point I wanted to mention and ask you about, Tony, is that since deliberate practice is new to a lot of people, a common concern, a valid concern, is that it might feel mechanical or robotic. Like it's not so much you're authentically going back and forth with a client, but you're practicing one specific skill each episode. And that's something that's by design, that if it feels maybe a bit forced at times, that isn't a negative thing. It's that we're rehearsing these things to make it second nature so that in the moment you have the skills available to pull from when it feels best to use with clients in the future. So it's about practicing, even if it feels like this isn't the exact skill you'd use in response to a specific client statement, so it becomes second nature. So you're really internalizing these processes and can do them freely without having to really struggle to locate that skill within your arsenal. Does that feel like an accurate description of how to engage with deliberate practice if it may not feel perfectly authentic at times?
Yeah, I mean, the one of the goals of deliberate practice for psychotherapy is for each person to have the opportunity to stretch, to explore, to experiment, to try different styles. You're not, because you're not with a real client, you can kind of say whatever you want, and you can see how it lands, you can see how it fits, and then you can discard it. Honestly, this is something I wish I had in graduate school before I started seeing real clients, is the opportunity to try 100 different things and see what sits, because without that, you end up trying it with real clients. And sometimes they look at you and they're like, what did you just say? So yeah, have fun with it and explore.
Great. Tony, Alex, any final words, pieces of advice for our brave listeners going forth and trying to learn psychotherapy using deliberate practice?
Yeah, I would say two things. I would say, first of all, congratulations on your courage, on stretching yourself and, trying to improve in deliberate practice, which is a pretty rigorous training method. And second of all, I would say, don't forget to have fun with it. It is possible to, be silly sometimes, to just stretch yourself and see how far you can go with your responses. Because if we're having fun while practicing, we're going to look forward to it a lot more.
Alex, anything to add?
I'll just say practice makes permanent. So go forth and prosper.
Tony, Alex, thank you both so much. And let's start the season.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks for listening to the Learn Psychotherapy podcast presented by Sentio University. Visit us at sentio.org for lots of free resources, including downloadable skill criteria, client statements, and sample responses. Our guest therapist for this season is Jen Ang. Caroline Wida is our mock client/actor in residence. And the video editors for our YouTube channel are Amy D. Smith and Alex Vosh. We'll see you next episode.